Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise to contribute to this debate on the motion to borrow 30 million US, a little over 80 million EC dollars for what is presented to this House as COVID response. Now, Madam President, lest I sound like I was preempted, I want to, first of all, make an observation. I think it might have been an error that the leader of government business did correct in her presentation when she used the word leaders and lenders. She corrected lenders to leaders in expressing gratitude. She did express gratitude and corrected herself. She had said lenders, and she said, I meant leaders. I take note of that because while it may have been an error, but it probably is testament to the essence of what is happening. So maybe it's so much about lending, and lenders and borrowing, that even when we ought to be saying leaders, we say lenders. But I acknowledge that the correction was made. Madam President, I want us to, even before we look at the specific borrowing itself, in the context of this resolution or motion, we need to examine the posture that we take as a government. Because correctly stated by the leader of government business, we are leaders. And our posture, our actions do mean a lot to the average St. Lucian, the average person looking at what's going on. And so we need to examine our posture as we come to this House to borrow another $80 million for COVID response. That posture, Madam President, should not be a posture of blame and comparison and competition. At a time like this, at a time when we are facing a pandemic, a crisis, our posture as leaders in this honorable House, in the government, should be one of empathy, sympathy, understanding, compassion, and not one that appears to be a back and forth and trying to preempt what other members will say and making reference to where we differ. I don't think we achieve much in doing so. So, Madam President, as I deliberate, I want to remind this honorable House that our posture, as correctly stated by the leader of government business in the upper house, as she calls it, the highest chamber in the land, should be one where we can disagree, but we must maintain a posture of empathy for what is going on. And I intend to do so by example. I will make my presentation and I will refer to areas where I do not agree with what is happening, but at no time will I try to engage in any combative actions, Madam President. So, Madam President, having said so, I want us to reflect, first of all, on where we are with the situation with COVID that has led us to apparently have to come here and borrow this money. To date, we have 3,149 cases reported as a total, as of today. And among those, we now have 34 deaths. 34 St. Lucians have perished as a result of, or because of COVID. And when we hear those numbers, we do have recoveries, and I'm happy to hear so that this is happening. And we have seen fluctuation in the spike, and I do hope that the curve flattens. But when we hear those numbers, Madam President, we need to respond with some measure of empathy and understanding. We must not respond as if every time there is a spike or there is an increase in our numbers, that the panacea, the solution, is to come to the Honorable House and borrow money. While we all agree that our resources are being challenged, our resources are under pressure, that cannot seem to be the solution. That cannot seem to be the way to go, Madam President. It seems, and I will get to vaccines a little later in my presentation, but it seems that this government has found a new vaccine. Borrowing. That is not the way, Madam President. We embrace the need for us to come back from time to time, make adjustments, but it cannot be the pattern that has caused us to even find a tomb in our local palace, Madi Poiti. That should never be associated with COVID. It shouldn't be, Madam President. So, Madam President, I want to ask, as we are here once more to borrow $80 million, heavily, that's a heavy bit of borrowing, close to the end of the budget cycle. Has the government given a proper account to St. Lucians, to this House, on what or how has it spent the total amount that has been borrowed before? I've always felt that sometimes when you justify your actions, people are more empathetic and understanding and cooperative if you run into trouble. And sometimes we blame St. Lucians and we say that they're not cooperating. And the reason why we have the problem is because they're not listening. But we also have to wonder whether part of that is not our fault. That if we account for the amount that we've borrowed previously, that when we return, if there is a need to borrow again, we may get the support, the understanding, and the cooperation of St. Lucians, as well as the opposition. So, Madam President, the leader of government business in her presentation earlier spoke of suspicion. Suspicion, every time the government comes to borrow money, there is suspicion. Madam President, who is creating the suspicion? How can there not be suspicion when you have not given the House and the people of St. Lucia a clear account of, first of all, how much you have borrowed in total for COVID? We have the total figures of people who have been tested positive. We have the total figures of people who have died. We have the figures of those who have recovered. We have those figures. St. Lucians need that information. But we have no figures on the total amount that has been borrowed for COVID thus far. What is so difficult about asking for the government to give the people and the opposition and the parliament feedback? How much have we borrowed? I believe that it is in excess of 300 million. I have heard that it is close to $500 million. I will not speculate because I am asking the government, stop having people speculate and tell us, just like we get the number of cases, just like we get the number of recoveries, give us the information. So we know where we are. We know how it affects our fiscal space. We understand how it impacts on the economy. And then you can get people to say, okay, we've borrowed 300 million. We've done this and that with it. We break down the sectors that it has been contributing to, and we give the figures. And now we have a shortfall, so we are back to ask to borrow more. I think people will understand that. And they'll say, you know what, let me make a sacrifice because the government has taken that amount and they've done that with it. But if you don't tell us how much you've borrowed, you don't account properly for what you've had to do before, how can you not have suspicion on the part of St. Lucians, the opposition, and other interest groups when you come here and ask for us to support the borrowing? Madam President, there is a certain amount of accountability that we need to take responsibility for as a government. So, while I ask and I speculate about the amount, and I hope that will be declared at some point, because I have not heard it in this Honorable House, the Minister responsible for health happens to be a member of this Honorable House, leader of government business. I think the onus is on her, Madam President, to insist that the Minister of Finance and the others responsible for approving this gives her and gives us, by extension, that information. I think it's the right of the Parliament to know. So, Madam President, I hear some sporadic general statements being made about some of the things that are being done, but that is not good enough. Let's be structured and responsible in the way that we respond. So, Madam President, I will now ask the government to account for the following. I've just chosen a few areas that I think are critical in terms of the response to COVID. And ask the government, while we are being asked to support a borrowing of $80 million today, tell us how much has been spent on the following areas. First of all, Madam President, testing capacity. How much have we spent on improving our testing capacity as a country from the monies that we've borrowed before? How much have we spent to try to mitigate against what we have referred to as the R rate? And I mentioned that in the last debate. The rate at which an infected person can infect other people. Can we show the nation to what extent that the borrowing we've had before has helped us to mitigate against that? Has helped us to improve our capacity to test? Madam President, we still have people speaking about 21 days elapsing between the time that they've gone for the test and the time they receive their results. And can that therefore affect the accuracy of the information that we are providing to the public on the number of cases? How much have we spent to deal with that, to make our testing capacity more efficient? Madam President, I know that there has been talk of people resisting going into quarantine. Is it because they are uncomfortable with the conditions? And have we decided to take some of that money and show the public how we have improved that situation? Madam President, the second area I want to ask about the expenditure. PPE. And I think this type of equipment is essential. Can we just tell the country how much the Ministry of Health and the government has spent on procuring personal protective equipment, PPE? That is not so difficult to do. The figures are there. I'm sure the government has some kind of breakdown of that. You don't have to come and give us a detailed description, but you can tell us how much. People will be grateful to know that, look, the government has spent that amount, and when they borrow money, that's what they're doing with it. Madam President, what about the primary health care facilities that provide support in the various communities? How much have we spent on those? The wellness centers around the country, in the rural areas like where I'm from, where the elderly and those vulnerable people have to sit in conditions that are very difficult, that may cause them to contract COVID as well. How much have we spent on those facilities to improve them? Just say so. Just let us know. And we might be more inclined to support your efforts when you say you want to come and borrow again. Madam President, in addition to the two that I have mentioned, or the three, let's look at the respiratory hospital, for example. How much have we spent to improve its capacity to deal with the figures? We're hearing the stories out there. I don't want to repeat too many of them in this honorable house. I like to have my facts. But we're hearing the stories out there of people not being able to get access to respiratory ventilators. Give us an idea of what you've spent to improve the situation at the respiratory clinic. That is a key resource, a very important part of the process. That institution is probably the most essential one in the north of the island and for the entire country in terms of providing the care and the care that is required for the people who are infected. Madam President, how many ventilators have we purchased? And what is the cost how much have we spent on purchasing ventilators? And finally, in that regard, Madam President, vaccines, which I mentioned earlier. The vaccine should not be borrowing. The vaccine is one of the most progressive moves that all nations around the world have made. And we know the story with our government. Last time I mentioned it. Barbados had to extend a hand and say, look, take the mole off your face. Here are some vaccines. Try and do something about it. Dominica did the same. And I was happy to hear that in the last sitting, there was an effort to procure vaccines from India. That is good news. But while you're at it, tell us how much you intend to spend or you have spent so far on procuring vaccines. And if it's not sufficient, you can come back and say we need some more, so we are going to borrow to do that. Madam President, I believe that some of those questions I raised have nothing to do with suspicion. If there is suspicion, the suspicion is being caused by the government's inability to provide information or its decision not to. And it's not us causing the suspicion. It's not St. Lucians raising that. Suspicion is natural. When you don't have information, you speculate. So, Madam President, I also heard the leader of government business make reference to leadership. And she referred to us in this honorable house, that we must be leaders, and I agree, and we must conduct ourselves in a manner that befits leadership. Part of leadership requires setting the example. When we want people to do things, we do likewise. And I think the government has an opportunity to set the example, because the leadership that is being provided has to be demonstrated in the way they engage all the leaders of this country. And I make reference to the command center. The command center that provides St. Lucians with updates on COVID. We still do not have, in this leadership, that includes the opposition, we still do not have that kind of leadership offered on behalf of the opposition. The opposition has not been given a place in there. I know there was a lot of talk about the NEMAC situation. The command center is a very essential unit chaired by the Minister of Tourism. Where is the embracing of the leadership that is being spoken about? So if you want to talk about leadership, Madam President, you need to demonstrate that you are serious about it. Extend that olive branch to the opposition, the official opposition of this country, and show good leadership. Madam President, I want to wrap up now, but before I do, I have to mention a department that is, we all know, has always been one of my major focus areas. Whatever the cause, whatever the case in this honorable house, I always try to be a voice on their behalf. We are borrowing money. We have borrowed money, lots of money. And there is a section of our population that has apparently given us the indication that they've been ignored in all of this. And I think there was a press release just recently. This morning outside the Parliament, I was questioned on it. And it is related to education, Madam President, of course. And while we have taken some action with closing schools, reopening schools, we have been talking about online learning and the issue with devices. I would have loved to know how much we have spent on that. But there is a specific area in the education sector, Madam President, at this point that I think we need to be very mindful of and we need to look after. And that is the early childhood department. It has gotten to the point where the early childhood administrators have made a formal plea that they have basically been excluded from the process. Now, that is for them to say, I am not an early childhood educator, but I think if they've said so, it's because they have felt that provisions have not been made for them. And so I would welcome the government looking at this new $80 million borrowing venture and decide to make a deliberate attempt to reach out to the early childhood development centers, because it is very difficult, Madam President, because of the nature of that sector, to deal with online learning. And I think we have other educators in this honorable house who will appreciate that the toddlers, the 3, 4, 5-year-olds or 2 to 4-year-olds, the way they learn is through a lot of interaction, play, whether it's structured or free play. And they need to be given specific assistance that the general protocols that we put in place for regular school does not really address. And I think there are people within our sector who are competent enough to guide the government in that regard. So I call for a special effort to be made to address the plight of the early childhood development centers, with some of that money that's been borrowed. Because I suspect so far that they have been out of the picture with regard to what we've borrowed before. And I think it's an indictment on the part of the Department of Education to have done that. So let us not continue in that way. And don't forget, Madam President, that department is the foundation of our education. It is. And if we have any regard for what Sir Arthur said regarding education and poverty, we need to build a strong foundation by showing that we are committed to dedicating some of our resources in that regard. So, Madam President, having said so, I believe that the posture of the government is wrong. I believe it should change from trying to complain about everything the public says, trying to blame the opposition. I realize today it has not happened, and I'm happy that I have not heard it. And that's good. I think we've made a step in the right direction. I want to commend the government's senators so far for having not done so. This is not going to solve the problem. I believe the posture of the government should be more empathetic and more embracing and more inclusive. And that should not exclude the opposition. Madam President, I always talk about best practice. There is always an opportunity for us to include that in our actions. It should not be arbitrary. Our actions should really not be. And some of what I'm hearing sounds that way. And if we demonstrate that kind of empathy that I mentioned, proper accountability for what we've spent before, I believe that the response that we get from the general public and all other stakeholders will be more positive. And so, Madam President, going forward, I implore the government to do so. I ask that we move away from the pointing fingers and the blame game and the comparisons. And let's pay attention to the serious issues, like the one I just raised. Let us pay attention to those. Let us not think that the solution to managing COVID lies in borrowing. It does not, Madam President. There are many other things that have been tried by other countries that have worked. There are many other actions, even by our St. Lucian folk who have had initiatives. We had the private sector coming together with an initiative. We have voluntary organizations around the country, some of my sports clubs and voluntary groups, doing a lot to educate their colleagues, doing a lot to educate the country about best practices, social distancing, wearing your mask and so on. There are people out there, Madam President, who are doing the right thing. Let us encourage them. Let's stop pointing those fingers, Madam President. Let's see something good in what our citizens are doing. And then we will probably get a lot more buying in and support for what is going on, for what we're doing. It's not about borrowing alone. It's not about borrowing. That will not solve the problem. So, Madam President, once again, I present my humble thoughts on that. And again, I hope that this time around, the government does not drop the ball. The leader of government business, the Minister of Health, by her own admission, did say so. Don't drop the ball this time. Don't drop the ball.
Leader of government business.
Madam President, on a point of order, I have never said that the government dropped the ball. I said St. Lucia dropped the ball, Madam President, not the government. Every one of us.
Proceed, Senator.
Madam President, I am willing to yield and accept that the minister never said that the government dropped the ball. But I will say that if she indicated that the ball was dropped, I am saying in this honorable house that I believe that the government dropped the ball. So whereas the government might want to bring us into it and say we dropped the ball, don't blame us. Take the responsibility. I say in this honorable house that I believe that this government dropped the ball. And this time around, please, let the ball not be dropped again. I thank you, Madam President.